Meeting to order. Is it Stefan?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Okay, we'll be with you shortly.
Okay. Thank you, Warden.
Ready? I'd like to call the meeting to order. January 12th. It's our first meeting of the year. Happy New Year to everyone, and thank you for joining. First meeting, our first order is adoption of our minutes, please.
So moved, Mr. Warden.
Thank you. Deputy Warden Mennel. Do we have a seconder, please?
Purcell.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, please call the vote.
Deputy Warden Mennel.
Yes.
Councillor McPhail. One more time, Councillor McPhail.
Right, that was a yes.
Councillor Purcell.
Yes.
Councillor Martin.
Yes.
Councillor Jones.
Yes.
Councillor French.
Yes.
Councillor Giguère.
Yes.
Councillor Ketchaba.
Yes.
Mr. Warden.
Yes,
8-1, the motion is carried.
thank you for that. Next item is disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof.
Sally Martin, I have to disclose concerning the closed session item concerning White Station.
Thank you. Seeing nothing further. Declare that order done. Next is our presenting petitions. And we have Stefan from Hempson, is it? I believe you're ready, so welcome and you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Warden, and I hope everyone can hear me. Maybe someone just give me a thumbs up just to make sure that.
Good.
Great, thank you.
Loud and clear.
Well, I appreciate the time, Mr. Warden, and members of County Council. My name is Stefan Chetranowicz. I am an associate partner in Hempson Consulting. We're a consulting firm in Toronto that specializes in urban planning and municipal finance. And we're very pleased to have been awarded this contract to undertake a development charges background study for the county. Many of you will be aware that we prepared a similar study about 5 years ago, though council at that time chose not to pass a development charges bylaw. And so I was asked in starting this particular study to summarize some of the quite significant legislative changes that have taken place over the last 5 years, and then set out for you the requirements for undertaking a study and how we propose to get things done over the coming months, and then also have a discussion about the kinds of rates you might be expected to get before you, and see how those match with what some of the lower tier municipalities in the county are charging, and what some of the charges that are in place in similar and surrounding jurisdictions. So I think we can go to the next slide, actually. So for those of you who are completely unfamiliar with development charges, we're really talking about fees here that are imposed on development to pay for growth-related capital costs. And so when we mean growth-related, we're talking about costs that are really only associated with expanding existing infrastructure or facilities in order to meet the needs of new development. And the other operative word is that these are capital costs only. Development charges can't be used to pay for operating expenditures. And the general principle behind them is that growth should pay for itself, so that the financial burden of building new infrastructure or expanding facilities is not borne by your existing taxpayers. Next slide, please. Thank you. The charges themselves are just one of several revenue tools that are granted to municipalities to pay for capital. And so the charges are often complemented by contributions that municipalities receive directly from developers when land is subdivided. And so particularly in larger subdivisions, the roadways, the sidewalks, the street lights and the intersections and sort of local park elements that are included within a subdivision or are sort of directly related to a subdivision, they would be paid for directly to the municipality by the developer by way of an agreement. Developer charges kick in order to pay for the larger infrastructure and facilities that have much broader benefit across the municipality by all development. And very recently, the development charge sort of framework has been expanded a little bit through new legislation that has introduced a complementary charge for community benefits. And I'll talk a little bit more about the new community benefits charge in a minute. Suffice to say that we won't be dealing with that under this study because the community benefits charge authority is only granted to local municipalities. But I do want to give you a sense of how they work and how they intersect with development charges, because the introduction of that particular charge has had sort of spillover effects on the way development charges are calculated and implemented. And then finally, also, there are charges that can be imposed on development to pay specifically for the acquisition of parkland. And those have been around for a long, long time. And then once infrastructure is initially constructed, the county, of course, has to repair it, maintain it, rehabilitate it when it breaks down, and of course make provision for the ultimate replacement of a facility when it gets to the end of its life. So there's a whole bunch of capital expenditures that the county has to incur that are funded not through these fees and charges, but through the property tax. And the property tax also kicks in order to pay for growth-related capital costs that are prohibited by the legislation from being paid for through DCs. And I'll get into what some of those sort of statutory caps that are placed on the amount of development charges that can be imposed. So that just gives you a sort of an overall, municipal finance picture at a very high level, and the role development charges play in that framework. I just want to delve in a little bit more detail on these new revenue streams and the way they intersect for lower tier municipalities. So again, here we're going to be talking about the fees and charges that can be imposed for initial infrastructure that's related to development, the growth-related capital costs. And again, the first column here on the left is really focused on the development charge framework. That has been around for some time. There's been separate development charges legislation in Ontario since the late 1980s. And that in fact superseded sort of more informal arrangements for imposing lot levies on development that extended way back to the 1950s. So this is a fairly well-established framework for imposing these charges. I mentioned that the charges are used to fund the initial round of capital infrastructure. The Development Charges Act prescribes a list of services that municipalities can impose the charges for. And the charges are imposed on a service-by-service basis. So when you go to a bylaw and you look at what the charges are, you'll see a separate charge for each of the services that the municipality is raising money for. over the last couple of years, the provincial government have introduced legislation to modify the list of services. So certain services have been removed from the eligible list, particularly parking, cemeteries, and airports. And whereas previously, back when we did the study 5 years ago, there were two categories of services that were distinguished. One category allowed the county to fund 100% of growth-related capital costs for the so-called hard services. And then there was a separate category of service where the county could only impose charges to recover up to 90% of growth-related capital costs. And those have now all been lumped together, and there's no sort of quote-unquote 10% discount on the charges. You can impose the full charges for all of the eligible services. And then, as I say, when we look at the middle column here, we have this parkland acquisition fees that can be imposed under the Planning Act. And again, this has been around for some time. And the way this works is that developers will pay either a percentage of the land that they are going to subdivide to the municipality. Either they vest 5% of residential lands or 2% for non-residential lands, specifically for parkland and open space use. But there are provisions that allow municipalities to impose alternative rates or higher rates that are based on the number of units per hectare, for example. And there are also provisions that allow municipalities to secure cash in lieu of the actual land, particularly in places where, in downtown of large cities where it's not really practical to build a park if you're getting 2% of a very small lot. So the only change that's occurred on the parkland side, although the provincial government 2 years ago initially introduced legislation that would have abolished those alternative rates, they then reintroduced it when they passed the final bill back in September. But they have introduced an appeal mechanism to the local planning appeal tribunal for these alternative rates. So that's kind of changed the way municipalities are looking at this. They're going to have to be a little bit more rigorous about how they go about imposing these in the future, I think. And then finally, we have this new authority under the Planning Act to impose community benefits charges. And these are intended to overlap with the development charges, so they can fund the ineligible services covered by the development charges. And they can these benefits can also be given as in-kind benefits by developers. These charges are only imposed on mid-rise and high-rise apartment buildings, so they're unlikely to feature at all, frankly, in Elgin County. But as I say, I mentioned them today because their introduction has had sort of spillover effects on how we do the DC studies. And these are also appealable to LPAT as well. So suffice to say, with all of these changes, things are a little more complicated than they used to be. And the least amount of change is on the development charge side, which is good for our study in some respects. But there are certain changes that we have to account for, and it will affect both the way we do the study and the quantum of the charge that is brought forward to you when you make decisions about whether you want to implement them and at what level you would like to implement them. So just going to spend a few slides here talking about the Development Charges Act and what we're required to do. So development charges are imposed by bylaw, and the maximum life of a bylaw is 5 years after the date it was passed. And before you pass a bylaw, you have to undertake a background study, and that's what we've been retained to help you with, and you have to hold at least one public meeting. One of the main purposes of the background study is to calculate the potential development charges the county could impose. You don't, of course, have to impose the maximum charges, but the study is a good benchmark for what you could impose if you wanted to go with the maximum. There are very prescriptive rules for how the charges are calculated. And there are restrictions on the maximum charges you can impose based in part on the level of service that you've been providing in the county over the last 10 years. I'll get into how that works in a minute. There's a lot of flexibility about whether the charges can be imposed on a countywide basis or an area-specific basis. If the county is going to proceed with new charges, you're going to have to set up a reserve fund framework. The Act requires you to have a separate reserve fund for each of the services for which you impose a charge. And the monies in those reserve funds can only be spent on the services that they relate to. The legislation is also quite permissive when it comes to sort of agreements with developers. So there's a framework under the legislation that allows the county to strike agreements to alter the timing of payments of development charges and to provide credits or front-ending provisions to developers who pay for or otherwise construct infrastructure on the county's behalf. The next slide shows the list of eligible services under the recent changes to the Act. So I've put an asterisk by all of the services for which a charge was calculated under the last county study. So services related to a highway is generally roads, but it also includes other infrastructure within roadways like bike paths and sidewalks and streetscaping and that sort of thing. But you can see, generally the first 4 services on this list comprise the majority of any development charge in most municipalities in Ontario. These are the so-called hard services. Waste diversion was introduced into the Act in 2015. Police and fire protection, the protection services have been around for a long time. And then everything from ambulance down was previously considered to be, one of the quote unquote soft services where you could only recover 90% of costs under the previous regime. So the key initial step we will have under this background study will be to determine what services can be justifiably included in any development charges in Elgin. And the next slide, please. Just a final thing about the legislative changes before I move on, because well, it's relatively complex, but I'm sure a lot of the interest is focused on sort of what we're going to do here in the county and how it matches up with what others are going to do. But this is important because if you elect to impose new charges, it will in fact be the lower tiers who collect them on your behalf. And that will be the case even if they don't have charges in place themselves. And there's been significant changes to the way collections are done. And so this will be something that will I hesitate to say it, but it will certainly represent an additional administrative burden for some of your lower tier municipalities. Previously, under the old scheme, what the default timing of payment for a development charge was the time of the issuance of a building permit. So a developer would come along, get his or her permit, and at the desk pay the charge that was in force at the time that they got their permit. What's happened now is that the amount that is payable has been changed, and the date at which it is paid has also been changed for certain types of development. So if you look on the left here, you'll see that what happens for development applications that come in as of 1st of January last year is that the amount of a development charge that they are required to pay is dated from the date at which they applied for their site plan or their rezoning. And it's frozen from that point until they get their building permit, and then they pay at the old rate that's been frozen over a period of time. So you can imagine that that is rather complex to track for a lot of municipalities, but that's just the way things are. And the second thing is that for certain kinds of developments, that is rental housing, institutional development, and nonprofit housing, their payments are not in one lump sum. They're spread over a period of time after the permit is issued. So for rental housing and institutional development, it's equal annual payments over a 5-year period. And for nonprofit housing, it's equal annual payments over a 20-year period after the permit is issued. So again, as you can imagine, that involves quite a lot of tracking for certain municipalities. It may be less of an issue in Elgin because there may not be sort of a large volume of the nonprofits or the rental housing. But in any case, it's certainly something that municipalities are going to have to grapple with, and are indeed grappling with. Next slide, please. So, yes, the county doesn't currently have development charges and doesn't have the authority to impose the community benefits charges. And as I said, your charges would be collected by the lower tiers, and they would be remitted to you on a monthly basis. And you would have to need to set up a reserve fund system for each of the services for which you impose a charge. And right now, there are municipalities that do not impose charges in the county, and the ones that do are Aylmer, Malahide, Central Elgin. And recognizing St. Thomas is separated, they have quite a complex development charge scheme as well. In terms of the study process, the Development Charges Act is quite prescriptive about the methodology used or to be used. So step 1 is to do a forecast of future development, specifically the amount, the type, and the location of development. The second step is to do a sort of backward-looking exercise. I mentioned earlier that there's a limit placed on how much development charge, how much the development charge you can impose is based on the level of service you've been providing over the last 10 years. So quite a lot of what we have to do is to determine what the average level of service has been over the last 10 years in order to work out what those funding limits are. The third step is to then do a forward-looking exercise to identify the infrastructure needs associated with the forecast development and what the costs associated with those infrastructure needs are going to be. And then we have to deduct from those costs any grants that you're going to be receiving from other levels of government, the extent to which those costs are benefiting your existing residents. So-called benefit to existing component cannot be included in the development charge. We have to account for any development charge reserve funds you have on hand, which of course in your case you wouldn't have any. And then to the extent that there are certain very large pieces of infrastructure that may have benefits that extend far into the future, we have to account for any so-called post-period benefit and remove that from the development charge calculation as well. And then what we're left with is the costs that are eligible for recovery through development charges, and they are translated into a charge per unit on residential development, and as a charge per square meter of new floor area on non-residential development. And then that's sort of what ends up in the background study. Then there's a separate process for bringing forward a development charge bylaw. So you have to release the background study to the public 60 days prior to passing the bylaw. And then you have to undertake a public process, which involves a public meeting, and there are required advertising or notification requirements for the public meeting that are very similar to the kinds of public meetings that are held under for planning applications. You have to release a draft version of the bylaw 2 weeks before the public meeting. And you have to hold a public meeting. And then subsequently, although it's not required, we would certainly recommend, and we've built into the process, that you have a period of time between the public meeting and when you consider the bylaw, because there may well be submissions that are received that we will probably want to address before bringing forward the bylaw to you. And then after the bylaw is passed, of course, there are further notification requirements. There's also a right of appeal of the bylaw to LPAT for 40 days after it's passed. And there are also requirements that you provide sort of information about what the bylaw contains on the website. Next slide, please. I just wanted to spend a little bit of time now on the rates that were calculated 5 years ago, how it was done and how it might compare to the kinds of rates that we're seeing elsewhere. And so what we've done here is these are the rates, the fully calculated rates, i.e. the maximum rates you could have imposed. And we've also indexed them to current dollars. So assuming that there's an indexing provision in your bylaw, this is what someone would be paying right now if you had imposed the full charge back in 2015. And so it was, if we look on the right, you can see it was about $5,000 for a single or a semi-detached housing unit. And then there were lower charges for the smaller type of units. So just over $3,000 for a townhouse unit, excuse me, and about $2,500 for an apartment unit. And the vast majority of the charge was related to funding roads and related infrastructure projects. So the kind of infrastructure that falls within the county road network. But there were smaller charges for general government, which is sort of a catch-all category of service dealing with planning studies. And there was a small charge for library services, for land ambulance, for long-term care, and for provincial offences infrastructure. But, you know, just over 80% of the charge essentially for roads. And then on the non-residential side, the next slide, please. The maximum charge that was calculated was just under $10 a square meter. And that, again, that was almost overwhelmingly a roads charge. And you can see that there were certain services for which the charge was only calculated for the residential sector. So for library, for example, we generally consider the need for library services to be driven entirely by the residential sector, and that's why we only calculate the charge for the residential sector for things like library. Whereas for roads and land ambulance, for example, we split the costs between the residential and the non-residential sector. Next slide, please. I was asked by Jim to address the question of, you know, what's the impact of development charges on the rate of growth and the amount of development that takes place. And there's no, I'll be honest with you, there's no straightforward answer to this question. There's been a lot of academic study, which is frankly a little theoretical. But I can certainly give you my sense of what we've seen at Hempson over the 30 years that we've been doing these kinds of studies. So just in terms of the financial impact of the county, and when you go back to 2015 and you look at the amount of development charge revenue that was being anticipated being raised under that study, it was around about $400,000 per year that was going to be collected for growth-related capital. And so those are funds that the county needs to spend regardless, because those were going to fund projects that were in your plans. And so it's really an either or. The financial impact would simply be if you had development charges, they would have, in theory, raised around $400,000 a year. Because you did not impose the charge, that $400,000 was instead raised through the property tax. When we look at the impact of development charges on housing, there's very, very little evidence to show that development charges have any influence on the rate of housing growth. They're simply too small amount of the total purchase price of a home to influence purchasing decisions, except at the margin. And in fact, what you see is in the places in Ontario where you have the fastest housing growth, you typically have the highest development charges. So that's also a similar picture when we look at the kind of development that relies on population growth for its existence. So that would be typically sort of smaller scale commercial retail development, generally follows the population growth. So you're going to get a Tim Hortons when you get a certain threshold of people. So that is also relatively uninfluenced by the presence or the quantum of development charges. There has been a study on the industrial sector, studies on the industrial sector that have demonstrated in certain situations that industrial development is a lot more sensitive to upfront costs, including municipal fees and charges. And so there's sometimes a good case to be made that particularly if it's in the sort of economic development interests of a municipality, to lower or exempt industrial development from payment of these fees, because it could, it could tip the balance on location making decisions, because it forms part of those initial upfront costs that a factory or a large industrial operation might need to sort of weigh before making a decision about whether to locate. That being said, there are a lot of other considerations that industrial developers take into account that are far more important than the amount of the development charge, and principally, the tax rate, and of course the value of land as well. So that's sort of at a very high level our general view of the impact of DCs. Of course, when you are introducing them for the first time, that can generate, it'll certainly generate, some articles in the newspaper, and there are optics to consider whenever you introduce something for the first time. So I don't minimize that, but that's a sort of a separate matter from the actual impact on the rate of growth. So next slide then. These next slides are just going to give you a sense of the kinds of charges that are imposed in places that are nearby to Elgin. So this bar chart here, everything in green you see will be the component of the charge that is imposed by an upper tier municipality. Everything in that sort of beige will be imposed by a local municipality. And where there are additional area-specific charges, those are shown in red. And so if you look at, I guess the other thing to say about this is that nothing about what you see in this slide or the slides that follow says anything about the range of services or the standard of service that's provided in any of these places. And in fact, a lot of the charges you see here may not be the full charge that these places could impose. So it's no reflection at all on the kind of servicing that anyone's getting anywhere. And you can see within the range of municipal charges that are shown here, generally those in Elgin County fall towards the middle or the bottom end of the range. So the highest charges are in, London, Thames Centre, Brantford, the highly urbanized areas, and sort of probably your place of perhaps that you have the most in common with would be some of the Oxford County municipalities. And then the next, this is the charge on single detached units. And then what we've also done is we've compared the charges that are imposed on single detached units just by county jurisdictions in Ontario. So this is a true like for like here. You can see that at the bottom end, Middlesex doesn't have a charge. Dufferin has a very low one. The previous Elgin County charge was sort of very similar to what's imposed in Wellington. And then you would see much higher charges in places that are more rapidly growing, particularly in parts of Oxford and Simcoe County. And then on the commercial side, it's a sort of a similar story. Again, London, Strathroy, Brantford lead the way. And the Elgin County charges, including the previously calculated charge from 2015, would put most of your lower tier municipalities either in the mid range or lower end of the range, depending on whether they had a local charge or not. And again, it's a similar story when we just look at the county component of charges. Simcoe and Oxford have the highest charges, just under 40, anywhere between $35 and $40 a square meter. And the Elgin charge previously calculated was around about $10 a square meter. And then Grey and Middlesex exempt commercial development from payment of the charges. And then finally on the industrial side here, you can see that a lot of places do not impose charges on industrial development. So anywhere in Oxford, and there isn't a charge in Elgin right now, other than St. Thomas, where there are charges on industrial development. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see that's also the case with the county jurisdictions as well. It's only Simcoe, Wellington, and Dufferin that impose charges on industrial development. So when we get to the bylaw, the Development Charges Act requires that certain types of development be exempt. So school boards, municipal buildings do not pay DCs, and there are limited exemptions for residential expansions, and where a home, for example, a single detached home is being duplexed, the additional unit is exempt. And there are other limited exemptions that apply in cases where residential homes are being expanded or split into two or more. And there are also exemptions provided for industrial development expansions. So an industrial building can expand up to 50% of its size and not pay a DC. So it's only paid on that component of the floor space that exceeds the 50%. A lot of municipalities will go further than the statutory exemptions and introduce exemptions for, well, we've talked about industrial, but more typically in your part of the world, on bona fide farm operations, places of worship, and to the extent that some places, are trying to provide incentives for development within specific locations, for example, in community improvement plan areas or downtown cores. There are often geographic exemptions that are baked into the bylaws as well. And so just in terms of the work plan that we're following, a lot of what we intend to do over the next couple of months is to do all the background calculations, the development forecast, the service level analyses, and the development of a growth-related capital program, and the modeling required to calculate the charges. We're hoping to come back to you in March to show you the list of projects that would be eligible for development charge funding, to get your approval on a growth-related capital program that can be included in a study, and some direction from you to proceed with actually drafting a background study. That would give us enough time to release a background study in April, hold a public meeting in May, and that would give us an opportunity, the first opportunity to come to council in June to consider a bylaw and rates. And we can discuss as time goes by the various options that council has for implementing the rates. As I say, the background study will show you the maximum charges you could impose, but you have quite a lot of flexibility about how you want to structure the charge, and whether you want to phase it in or implement only 50% of it, or provide exemptions to certain kinds of development. So there are lots of options, and we'll certainly provide you with those throughout the process. So that's what all I had to sort of formally speak about today, but I'm certainly very happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you, Mr. Warden.
Thank you, Stefan. It's a very detailed report, lots of information, good report. I'd like to open the floor for questions from councillors. Councillor Ketchabah, please go ahead. I believe you're muted. There you go.
Sometimes the space bar works, sometimes it doesn't. Stefan, can you, will your study include any cost benefit analysis relating the cost of administration? For example, if Elgin County are to adopt this, we're talking about 7 jurisdictions which are going to be collecting on behalf of the county. So what's the cost of that to the lower tiers? And secondly, in any of your experience, are there mechanisms for the lower tier to recover that cost? Should we at the lower level not have a development charge?
So the first part of your question is, no, we did not anticipate trying to figure out what the administrative cost would be for the lower tiers to do the collections. It's certainly not a requirement of the Act that we include that. I would say that for those municipalities who already collect their own charges, this is not going to complicate matters. I mean, it may add to the volume a little bit, but provided the bylaw provisions are relatively uniform, then I don't think there's going to be too much of a difference for local municipalities that already have the charges in place. For those that don't, it will be new, no question about it. But it's not something that is, entirely unfamiliar for municipalities to go about collecting fees and remitting them to, upper level, county governments or regional governments. So I'm not sure that I'm not sure that I'm in a position to sort of say more than that, frankly. And then the second part of your question, and I apologize, it's just sort of slipped my mind now, but could you just remind me what your second part was?
Yes. In your experience, are there any mechanisms in place for these lower tiers that do not have development charges to recover the cost of administration?
So not through the charge itself, because those are operating expenses, and you can't include operating expenses in the charges itself. But as for whether there are any cases where lower tier municipalities would, have some arrangement where the county would fund The administrative cost of collecting the charge, I've never heard of one, although I wouldn't preclude it from existing, put it that way.
Further questions?
Tom, Sally,
Go ahead.
yes, Stefan, the community benefits one, Central Elgin does have at least 3 6-story buildings going in at present, so that one might apply in Central Elgin. I liked your concept that it could be countywide or area specific. So therefore, certain areas, certain of our municipalities, it could be imposed in, whereas not in others, if that was a concern. There's certainly these 3 6-story buildings are all where there are county roads accessing them, and those county roads will have to be fixed up or repaired. And of course, because we have no development charges countywide, strictly the taxpayers of Elgin County will be paying to change those roads. So this is a serious concern as far as I'm concerned. I was very much in support of development charges previously when you brought the report, and I certainly would support it again this time.
Councillor Jones, go ahead.
Thank you, Warden. Steph. County, just Chris.
You're freezing up on us, Grant.
We're never in favor of it, but sorry, Warden. Yeah, Zell did implement our bylaw in December. It went over fairly well as a phased-in approach, and I think if any municipalities have questions, our treasurer Jeff Carswell could lead you through it as to how it's been for him to put the proper procedures in place in his accounting system.
Mr. Warden?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Certainly, Malahide has had a development charge for a number of years. We found it very handy, especially when, there is growth. We're experiencing growth and we need to put capital costs in, and we can draw from that development charge rather than putting it on the tax base. As Jim has stated, we're losing about $400,000 a year by not having the development charges, and that has to come right out of our tax base. So looking forward, I think that we have to be cognizant of the fact that our transfer payments from the province and the feds is probably going to be less. It has been falling for the last 40 years. I anticipate it probably falling faster. We need to have a source of revenue that so we're not going back to our existing taxpayers. So I'm fully in favor of the development charges.
Thank you for that. Further comments? Councillor Ketchba.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Warden, to Stefan. In the examples or comparators that you used Chatham, Kent, and it showed in brackets water, wastewater. And I assume that means that they're just charging development charges for water and wastewater projects down there. We currently have charges for water, wastewater, though we don't call them development charges. If development charges were implemented across the region, would that eliminate these other charges?
So through you, Mr. Warden, no, they wouldn't. And you can see the last time we did the study that there were no water and sewer charges included in the calculation. And I can only assume that that's because you have separate mechanisms for, paying for those services. So we'll certainly look at that, but there'll be, if we were to impose a development charge, certainly we'd have to be very careful that it didn't overlap or quote unquote double dip with anything you were recovering through another revenue stream.
Go ahead, Councillor Ketchba.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. That's the point I'm trying to make. If we are already charging for these services in one area and doing it at the lower level, Why are we considering development charges countywide when you can do the same charges through a development agreement?
Well, through you, Mr. Warden, the county charge would only pay for county services, so county roads and other county services. So the local municipalities do not have the ability to impose charges for county services. Only the county can do that.
Tom? It's
Go
Sal.
ahead, Sally. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Stefan, I meant to commend you. That was an excellent presentation and made things very clear. And we have to realize, I think, that we've lost over $2 million for the county in the 5 years since we didn't implement it previously. That's all. Thank you.
I'd like to make a comment on my commute into the chambers here this morning, come up Wellington Road, and on the new Lyndhurst on Central Elgin side, and then on the Southwell side, there's considerable growth. And there's calls for traffic lights out there. Brian Lima would be aware of that. And that's something we're going to need and grow into. And that's a missed opportunity. That we could have collected charges for that. So I'm certainly in favor of this too. So just a comment. Further comments?
Mr. Warden, Bob Purcell.
Go ahead, Bob.
Okay, this is kind of a question for the consultant, and I don't expect an answer, but I'd like to see the answer come back as part of the study. Can the lower municipalities outsource the administration of a development charge for a higher tier? And I'll be very specific about that because we may be pushing the envelope of it. If we set up a shell company at the county level, and all the local municipalities have to do is collect the funds, submit them, and then apply to get them back as they need them for county work. All the administration, all the control, all of the keeping it standardized across the county, and more specifically, the costs would be vested in that outsourcing location. And maybe you have to use an accounting firm or something to do it on a countywide basis, but our problem, as has already been brought up, many of our smaller municipalities, we have maybe 1 or 2 people in a treasury department, and you start adding a little bit more work on, it's a lot more work on an individual level. Also, I think it's really important when it comes back that we give each of the municipalities the ability to opt in or opt out, because all of the charges that we're talking about really do apply to the more urban areas within the county. And, we're probably one of the smallest municipalities. We have the least amount of infrastructure that requires a lot of attention. And we'll probably never collect a lot back from whatever we send in. So, and the comments about losing 400,000 or 2 million or stuff like that. All that money comes out of the same pocket. We're just putting another label on a hunk of taxes and making it maybe a little more palatable because we don't have to show a 4% increase locally versus a 2% because we got a development charge that offsets it. So we need to keep those things in mind. But if you could give us an answer on possible outsourcing, the administration is a big problem, and you were nice enough to point that out.
Thank you, Bob. Further comments, questions? Councillor McPhail, go ahead. I believe you're on mute.
Development charges on each one of the different types of development are dollars that are collected earmarked to site-specific improvements necessary because of the development, or are they put in a general fund and the county has the ability to spend them wherever they feel it's necessary? Malahide has a great industrial boom and residential boom, and a significant amount of development charges are collected, and those dollars are spent to alleviate problems in Port Stanley. So is it something that when they're collected, they have to be site specifically spent on infrastructure as a result of that development?
Well, through you, Mr. Warden. So the answer is to the first part of the question is no. These are not charges that have to be for which the revenue has to be spent on the site on a site-specific basis. So you recall in my presentation, I distinguished between the contributions that developers directly make when they're subdividing land for the improvements to that land that are required on site or very near the site. And those are distinguished from the development charges they pay, which are for infrastructure and facilities that have a much broader benefit. And so that's not to say that the money can be spent on whatever the county wants. The charges are still imposed on a service basis. So the roads component of the charge must be spent on county roads projects, and they must be growth-related projects. And so it's not entirely a free-for-all, but it is not a true fee-for-service where someone pays a charge and they get, infrastructure in return for their site. It doesn't work that way.
Tom?
Go ahead,
One more question, Mr. Warden, if I can. So
All right.
the development charges, the development charges that have the ability to be moved around at the discretion of the county within the rules of development charges, those charges are in top of any developer's agreement that are put in place by the municipalities to create infrastructure to service specific developments?
Through you, Mr. Warden, that's correct.
Okay. Councillor Martin, you had a question?
Comment that if we went with this area specific one, I'm curious, Stefan, would the development charges collected, say 4 of our municipalities choose, and we make it for 4 of the municipalities that already have development charges, would the money that we collect then, if there's growth in, say, Dutton, and a county road needs to be repaired, would those development charges that we pay go toward that, or would that still come out of taxes, or how would that be done?
Through you, Mr. Warden, there's 2 ways of doing this. The first is to calculate a countywide charge and assume that the benefits are all countywide, and then only impose it in certain areas. In that particular case, you will raise, let's say, only half the money, and you will have to pay for the exemption that you're providing to the remainder of the county through the tax base. The other way to do it is to say there are certain pieces of infrastructure that only benefit certain areas. And so we're going to sort of structure the charge as if it's sort of a municipality within a municipality. And that way the entire project is funded, but it's only funded from development within that area. Now, that kind of area-specific structure only works for certain services, because you've got to be able to clearly delineate the benefit of certain pieces of infrastructure. And I would say it's very, very rare to do that with roads, because it's very difficult to identify the benefit of a road, because it's part of a network, and the network is accessible by everyone in the municipality. It's not like a pipe where you can draw on a map who's benefiting from the pipe because their home is connected to it. So typically that sort of structure only applies to water and sewer services. It's very rarely applied to roads.
Well, we've had a good discussion. Are we through?
Yeah.
Are we looking to receive and file this? I'd look for Stephen, thank you for the presentation. Good discussion. I'm looking for a mover and a seconder for the report, please.
So moved.
Moved by Deputy Mayor Mennel, Deputy Warden Mennel, second by
Jones,
Jones, thank you. Ready for the question?
Deputy Warden Mennel,
Yes.
Counselor McPhail,
Yes.
Counselor Purcell,
Yes.
Counselor Martin,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
yes.
Counselor French,
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer,
Yes.
Counselor Ketchba,
Yes.
Mr. Warden,
Yes.
9-0, the motion is carried.
Thank you for that. All right, we'll move on. We have to go into committee of the whole. I entertain a motion to move in second, please.
Jiguer, move.
By Jiguer, second by
Jones,
Jones. Thank you. Question, please.
Deputy Warden Mennel,
Yes.
Counselor Purcell,
Yes.
Counselor McPhail,
Yes.
Counselor Martin,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
yes.
Counselor French,
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer,
Yes.
Counselor Ketchba,
Yes.
Mr. Warden,
Yes.
9-0, the motion is carried.
All right, thank you. We are in committee of the whole. I think I'm up first with Warden's report. It's in your package to save some time. I'm not going to read it all, which should put a smile on most of your faces. It is there, and certainly if there's any questions, I try to answer them. If not,
Just a
Go ahead.
comment, Mr. Warden.
yes,
On the Port Bruce Bridge reopening, I don't think we formally congratulated Brian on the results of that bridge. It was on budget and on time, and I've only heard positive comments. So Brian, if you could pass on to your staff on that successful completion. So thank you so much.
100% agree with that. Job well done. Pass that on to whoever was involved there.
Yeah,
Councillor-
Mr. Warden, yeah, I would like to echo that and thank Brian and his team and the contractors, and Brian in particular for the communication strategy that was used. It made a huge difference. So I think that sets a good precedent for other projects. So thank you and well done.
It was a good day. Some positive news for sure. I have a nephew who lives down there, and lots and lots of good comments. So thank you for that.
Receive the report.
Has it been moved?
No.
Okay, need a mover and a seconder, please.
So
Councillor
moved.
Ketchba and Councillor McPhail. Call the vote, please.
Deputy Warden Mennel,
Yes.
Counselor McPhail,
Yes.
Counselor Purcell,
Yes.
Counselor Martin,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
Yes,
Counselor French,
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer,
Yes,
Counselor Ketchba,
Yes.
Mr. Warden,
Yes,
9-0, the motion is carried.
thank you for that. Next item, I believe, is me again, and it's committee and local board appointments.
Just one comment.
Go ahead.
Education Task Force Committee is not on there, which I am the appointee and Dominique is the alternate appointee. So I think that should probably be listed, I'm assuming.
I believe that's probably just an oversight.
Correct. Yes, thanks for pointing that out.
We will make that amendment. All right. And I guess we need a mover and a seconder for these.
Purcell.
Thank you. And Purcell and Mennel, call the vote, please.
Deputy Warden Mennel,
Yes.
Counselor Purcell,
Yes.
Counselor McPhail,
Yes.
Counselor Martin,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
yes.
Counselor French,
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer,
yes,
Counselor Ketchba,
Yes.
Mr. Warden,
Yes.
9-0, the motion is carried.
All right, thank you for that. Staff reports, manager planning, please. County of Elgin official plan review. 5 years went by fast. Go ahead, Nancy.
Good morning, everyone. Through you, Mr. Warden, to members of council. I provided this report, which sets out our process, our consultation strategy, and our timing for the county's official plan review process. One of the items is determining when the first public meeting will be occurring, which will launch the official plan review for the county. This ideally would be an evening meeting to allow for maximum attendance by individuals. However, at this point, unfortunately, I think we need to plan for a virtual meeting, given the current status of things. I'm looking at targeting the last week of February for the public meeting and look for some input as well from you. Initiating the OP review process for the County of Elgin will ensure that the official plan responds to the changing provincial priorities and confirms the community vision, the values, the directions, and the policies and actions to meet the needs of the community for the future. This process is expected to take approximately 1 year to complete, with ample opportunity for community and local engagement. It is recommended that a copy of this report also be forwarded to the County of Elgin's local municipalities, conservation authorities, and the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing for their information. And I'm open for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Nancy. Questions from the council? Pretty straightforward. Right, need a mover and a seconder, please.
So move.
That's Martin and French. Thank you. Discussion, further discussion, ready for the vote.
Deputy Warden Mennel,
Yes.
Councillor McPhail,
Yes.
Councillor Purcell,
Yes.
Councillor Martin,
Yes.
Councillor Jones,
Yes.
Councillor French,
Yes.
Councillor Jiguer,
Yes.
Councillor Ketchba,
Yes.
Mr. Warden,
Yes,
9-0, the motion is carried.
thank you for that. We're at the Director of Financial Services. Do we need a short break before? It'll likely be lengthy.
We're doing the Provincial Offences Administration.
Oh, okay. We'll do that one first. Go ahead. And welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Warden, to you and through County Council. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, all the provincial court proceedings were suspended as of March 16th, 2020. Audio appearances began on June 22nd, 2020 for specified court proceedings such as early resolutions and judicial pretrials, but the commencement of trials was still pending. On December 18th, 2020, the Ministry of the Attorney General advised that video court proceedings can commence as of January 25th, 2021 for all court proceedings, including trials. In-person court proceedings can also begin provided the approved health and safety measures have been implemented and the Ministry of the Attorney General checklist has been addressed. And once the checklist is completed, it has to be reviewed by the Regional Senior Justice of the Peace for approval. Discussions were had with the Provincial Offences Prosecution Office and the IT Department to see what equipment was required to begin video court proceedings. And that began shortly after the December 18th, 2020 announcement by the Ministry of the Attorney General. The majority of equipment needed to support the commencement of video court proceedings, as well as which users would need these capabilities, is listed in the report provided to Council. Video equipment for court proceedings not only needs to be installed inside the courtroom, but also in the 2 meeting rooms located outside of the courtroom. These meetings allow for defendants, enforcement agencies, officers, and defendants who do not have the proper equipment or the proper internet connection to be able to offer evidence while still complying with social distancing protocols. The equipment was ordered near the end of December, and an update from the IT department advised that most of the equipment has already been delivered. The estimated cost for the video equipment is approximately $9,000 and will be drawn from the Safe Restart Fund. The equipment should be installed by mid-January, and I just got an email from IT this morning saying that it probably can commence the beginning of this week to start installing. And then it can be tested, and we're going to do mock trials to ensure that the smooth transition to virtual live provincial offences court proceedings. The anticipated start date for video proceedings is the end of February or beginning of March. This report is to be received and filed. Thank you.
Thank you, Deanna. It's hard to believe a year ago that we'd be doing something like this, but it's interesting times for sure. Questions concerning the report from anyone? All right, I'll entertain a motion to receive and file, please.
So moved.
Mennel, Jones? Go ahead with the question.
Deputy Warden Mennel.
Yes.
Counselor McPhail. One more time, Counselor McPhail.
Yes.
Thank you. Counselor Purcell.
Yes.
Counselor Martin.
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
Counselor French.
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer.
Yes.
Counselor Ketchba.
Yes.
Mr. Warden.
Yes,
9-0, the motion is carried.
thank you. Now, before we start the budget presentation, do you want, how about a 5-minute break and then we'll get into that? 5-minute recess. Mr. Bunshu, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Warden.
Floor is
Put
yours.
the,
Go ahead.
We can put the PowerPoint presentation up.
It's good.
Okay, perfect. And on to the next slide. To start with, a year ago, council approved the 2020 10-year plan. So that ran from 2020 through 2029, and that plan included significant improvements in service. For one, the average capital spend was approved to increase from $15.5 million to $19.5 million. To do that, $10 million of debt was added to, or I'm sorry, we had initially had $10 million of debt. In order to fund the capital spend, we increased that to $35 million. In addition, $600,000 was added for paramedic services to increase staffing levels, and a reserve was set up for modernization tools for of $1.5 million. The net impact was that there was to be 3.6% tax increases to fund these service improvements from 2020 through 2029. And then the intent thereafter was that it would then, rates of increase for taxes would follow inflation at approximately 2%. What that meant is that an average home would increase from just over $1,500 in 2019. By the end of that 10-year plan, taxes would be up to $2,165. Next slide, please. We'll start with some good news that we've had since that 10-year plan was approved. Government funding has improved by $400,000 in areas such as the OMPF decline wasn't as large as anticipated. Some additional money for homes. We had some one-time fund such as the SRF. So the net impact was $400,000 annually. You remember back in November that we had our first debenture was issued, and we saw significant improvements in interest rate from what was anticipated. That's delivering about $200,000 of improvement to the plan. The homes have been working diligently to improve efficiencies. One of the areas they've been focused in on is the case mix index. The net impact of those changes is about $200,000 annually in reduced costs and added revenue. We also have good news on supplemental taxes and payment in lieu of taxes, net of growth. That added up to about $700,000. That is a portion of that is the added year 2030 being added in. We've had some improvements in central Elgin's, both pills and supplementals, the pills coming from the wastewater treatment plant. Next slide, please. In the review process that we've conducted so far, we've also identified some cost reductions. From the City of St. Thomas, we'll be able to tighten the budget for social services by about $200,000, and economic development has been adjusting their budget and has reduced some of their spending by about $200,000. So the improvement of $400,000 on top of the money identified on the previous page gives us a total of $1.9 million of total good news that's going into the new plan. That money can be used to either fund increased costs to improve services, and as well, some of that could be used to reduce the tax burden. Next slide, please. There were also some increases in costs, and I'll take you through those now. On the capital and facility side, we had a net increase in cost of about 300,000. Capital spending as a result of the building audit that was conducted is resulting in $800,000 of increased capital spend on average each year. As well, we had some other capital increases in both IT equipment and ambulances. We're going to need to increase debt to finance this, and that adds another 100,000 to the cost. The library expansion that could potentially take place in Elmer is going to add another 100,000 in rent. And we've had as well then on the roads some reductions net of revenue on the for capital of 800,000. The total of all that, as I said, nets to a total of $300,000. We have another $300,000 of increased costs split between staffing and the community improvement plan, and we'll talk about that in the following slides. Insurance and legal adds another $200,000. The new ambulance contract, $100,000 of increased costs. And then there were some minor other changes, such as the modernization reserve being established for EOC and agenda management software. The sum of those changes that I've just gone through totals $900,000 of cost, matched with the 1.9 million of improvement that you saw on the previous slide. That nets to a net change of $1 million of reduced costs over the 10-year. That $1 million will allow us to improve the tax rate increase by 0.3%. As I had said earlier, the 2020 plan that council approved in last February was a 3.6% increase. So that means that at this point in time, it looks like we would be coming in at around a 3.3% increase for 2021 as a tax rate increase. Next slide, please. Just going through some of the details on the increases from the previous slide. On the capital, it was the building condition audit that was driving the increase in cost, and that audit identified significant investment required to maintain both on a maintenance side and a capital side to maintain our buildings. In terms of the staff increases, we had a part-time staff treasury position is being replaced by a full-time junior planner. We have the addition of a 2-year contract for administrative assistant that will be shared between engineering and planning. And we had the promotion of a senior financial analyst to be the manager of finance. You'll remember from a report a couple of months ago on insurance that we're seeing a significant increase in insurance both this year and next. And then we are anticipating that in outlying years that it'd be more standard rate of inflation on insurance. The standard being we're assuming about 4.5% be a normal increase thereafter. External legal services, that's related predominantly to 2 components, labor law as well as MPAC assessments. As I previously mentioned, the library change is a result of the Elmer branch and the possible expansion there. And I spoke briefly about modernization tools. Last year, our reserve was set up. That reserve was to be used and is being allocated this year for GIS software and agenda management software. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, as it relates to taxes, as I said, we had a 3.6% increase previously planned a year ago. With $1 million of net improvement, that's a 0.3% reduction from that previously planned increase, resulting in a 3.3% increase for 2021. And then in future years, we're looking at a 2% in the outlying years of the plan. The next slide. As I mentioned, with the increases in capital spending required resulting from the building condition audit, we will need to add further further debt. Previously, last year, we had $35 million planned. A preliminary estimate is that a further $9 million will need to be added, and we'll be doing further reviews this month to determine that exact number. But if at the $9 million increase, that'll take us to about a $44 million of debt. As I mentioned, the interest rate for debt is exceptionally low at this point in time. The debentures we issued in November, we're coming in at a cost of 1.4%, 1.43%. And in the plan, we're assuming that the debt that we have in the outlying years will be slightly higher than that, but we're still assuming a very favorable 2% by 2023. The debt that we'll be taking on will all have 10-year terms. That means that by the end of 2030, we would be down on the debt that we've issued between now and 2023. The residual of that debt would be only $4 million of principal still outstanding. It's quite likely, and as we go through the review of debt this month, that we may need then at the end of that plan to add debt to basically a second tier of 10-year debt at the end of this 10-year plan, so that we'll have a cycling level of 10-year debentures that we'll be undertaking. Next slide, please. On the next part of the presentation, we'll talk about surplus and reserves. In the presentation in November, we presented where we were with SRF and with our estimated performance for 2020 on the operating budget. SRF, we thought there'd be about a carry forward of about $900,000, and we were looking at about a $1.4 million positive performance on our 2020 operating budget. Additional information to that is we're looking at capital surplus right now. We're still working on that final number as invoices are still coming in through the end of this week. But we're estimating it's going to be somewhere in about $2 million of capital surplus will be identified or available from 2020. We had some further good news in December from the province. They introduced a phase 2 component of SRF funding. And for phase 2, we received an additional $250,000. The sum of all those items adds up to about $4.5 million. We've identified just over $600,000 of uses for SRF funding. That leaves us with $3.9 million of available money that can be put into reserves or a portion used to reduce taxes. Next slide, please. On the $600,000 that I've identified for SRF uses, this table here identifies the uses of that. I won't go through that, but if there's any questions, I can speak to any of the individual items. Moving on to the next slide. This slide identifies what reserves are set up currently in this new 10-year plan. The components of reserves that we've identified are for SRF, for modernization tools, for efficiency funding, as well as other reserves. I'll focus in on the other reserves for the moment. The committee has asked that we set aside money that could potentially then be released in the future for the community improvement plan, that at the rate of $150,000 a year or $1.5 million over the 10 years. In the capital plan, there's money set aside for capital works at White Station, and the committee has asked that we place that in reserve so that it's not released until approved by council, and there'll be a discussion later today in the closed session on White Station where you'll hear more about that topic. The total reserves in the plan is $5 million, the bulk of which were in those two items that I just discussed. Moving to the next slide, we'll speak to tax ratios next. On tax ratios, we're going to speak about two different tax ratios. One is farm tax, the other is a new potential subclass or new subclass that provides us to change rates, and that's the new small business property subclass. Starting with farm ratios, historically, the farm ratio has always been 25%. In 2019, Council approved a reduction of that rate down to 23%. In 2020, Council determined that it was best to hold that rate at 23% and then to determine if that rate should be adjusted with the release of new MPAC assessment in 2021. What has changed is because of the pandemic, MPAC has delayed the release of new assessment. So the assessment is equal to what it was a year ago. There's been no shift in tax burdens between classes. And so the committee is recommending that for one further year, the tax ratio for farm be left at 23%. The province has introduced a new small business subclass. They're still in the process of finalizing all the legislation, and then MPAC will need to roll out what the assessed value is of properties in that class. So it's very similar to the way they rolled out the process for the small farm value added that we provided a special rate for last year. With the small farms value added class that was introduced 2 years ago, but it wasn't until 6 months later after budgets were approved that the information was available. That's why we introduced it then in 2020. Same thing here. We don't know the details. We don't know how much assessment is in there. And as a result, the committee is recommending that we hold off rolling this out, and we'll know then later this year what the impact is. We can then have those discussions and roll it into the 2022 tax cycle then. And then final slide, please. So the recommendations before you today, Council, are that approximately $9 million of debt be added to fund the facility asset management plan, and that the tax ratios for small, commercial, and farm be left unchanged. In addition, on this slide, you'll see what the next steps are. Today, the steering committee will be having a meeting following this council meeting where we'll discuss any direction that we receive today from council. We'll meet again on the 26th where that committee will review the capital and operating 10-year plans, as well as which will include closed and carry forward projects. And then they'll establish a recommendation for tax rates. That will then come forward to the following council meeting, which will occur on February the 9th, where it's anticipated that we'll be asking council to approve the operating and capital budgets together with tax rates and ratios. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jim. I'll open the floor for questions for Treasurer.
Tom, it's Grant.
Go ahead.
Jim, thank you. Jim, years were significant increases, yes, across the board for all of us. But in fact, you're still looking at 4.5, I think you said, per year. Why is that? And inflation rate shouldn't be that high, but for insurance companies, their inflation rate's higher, is it?
If you look historically, insurance has been going higher than the rate of inflation. That could be because we're a more litigious society. It could also relate to climate change is putting more burden on insurance companies because of higher costs for payments from natural disasters. But that is based off of past experience that we are seeing far higher rates of increase than the normal rate of inflation.
Thank you.
Further questions, comments?
Couple of items, Mr. Warden.
Go ahead.
You know, as I look through the budget, and I know it's very early, in that budget or recognition for any of the potential savings that seem to be talked about in the service delivery review. Is that something that, if there are savings, where does that fit into a 10-year budget?
Julie, do you want to talk about the service delivery review and how we plan on handling that?
Certainly. So council has an upcoming action plan. Oops, sorry, can you hear me? Council has an upcoming action planning session, which will include a focus on the consultant's recommendations included in the municipal service delivery review. So council, once you sift through the 110 recommendations, then we can realize some of those savings, hopefully, in our plans and budget documents. Until we have a plan from council about which priorities you'd like us to explore, it's difficult to kind of presuppose how much savings will be realized. Which is why we scheduled this session for January, to get it in as early as possible, and then we'll be able to make some amendments to the budget accordingly.
Okay, next question. Know that we have sat around as a council for the last couple of years recognizing the importance of broadband in Elgin County. And I think that when we go out and do our surveys, as I read in our document, that certainly broadband is a concern across this whole county, and a lot of it in underserviced areas. And certainly as I look through the budget, there's absolutely not one line that is put in our budget that recognizes the need to get started with some type of broadband policy or direction. And I'm thinking that when does the committee see that is going to start? If we don't have at least some dollars put into a budget line to recognize it this year, while that carries over to next year's budget, and when do we decide that we're serious about broadband in Elgin County, and show at least to the residents that we're committed to it by putting starting either a reserve fund or something that is going to take us down that road of trying to get our underserviced people broadband, which I think we've all recognized is very important, and we need to get on with that job, because if we don't do it, nobody's going to do it for us.
Well, I couldn't agree more. Last night, Central Elgin Council met. There was a few examples of need for better internet. We've seen a couple this morning as well. With the lockdown, we're right back to where we were 6-7 months ago. We got school kids at home trying to learn, parents trying to work from home. So the struggle is very real. Now, Julie, would you like to try that, to answer that?
Certainly. I think that's a really excellent point, Councillor McPhail. And I think council can have confidence in the connectivity committee and the work of the connectivity committee to date. They've shown that they are taking broadband concerns in our community very seriously, and have meetings scheduled as soon as this Friday, I believe, to commence their work on developing kind of a roadmap for what broadband looks like in Elgin County. There are very different options for council's consideration when it comes to what a supportive program for community broadband looks like in Elgin County. And I think what council will see in the very near future is some recommendations coming forward from the connectivity committee with respect to kind of what an earmarked budget figure looks like for a community broadband program. So I think it is a very valid point that you've raised, but I would suggest it's a bit premature to include any sort of figure in our budget at this point. The other point I should mention is, as council has experienced in the past, anytime we have kind of an outstanding program or a new initiative or new service that comes forward to county council, we're able to recommend to council at that time how we can secure funding to support it. So if council decides to support the recommendations that come forward from the Connectivity Committee, I can assure you that my team and I will do everything that we can to make it work within the budget.
Does that answer your question?
Well, certainly, and you know, I understand all that, but I don't think there's anybody around the table doesn't realize that it doesn't matter what recommendations that really end up coming from the Connectivity Committee. Certainly looking forward to working on that group, but we know that it's going to require funding, and I know in my thinking was being involved with municipal government, that if you know that you're going to have a situation that's going to require your attention, that the sooner that you start putting money in a sock to be prepared for that inevitability that there's going to be funding required. Certainly that's the way that I've always felt was the best way forward. But if it's a situation that you know, we have the ability to go into the global budget and come up with funding, there's going to be a lot of competing projects that are going to also be taking advantage of additional money that's left aside. So it's just something that that I feel that at some point in time, this isn't going to be fixed next year. It's not going to be fixed in the 10 years going forward with this budget. But at some point in time, we have to make a statement saying, yes, we're going to start getting prepared to get our residents the broadband that they deserve with any means or methods that we can come up with that will work. So if everyone's happy of just saying, okay, we'll find the money when we need to find it, that's fine. I can live with that. But certainly, I always, like I said, always felt that when you know you've got a problem, the sooner you start putting money away for it, down the road when you get to a point that you need to draw on those funds.
Julie, would you like to reply?
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Warden. Through to members of council. The other alternative, rather than waiting for a recommendation coming from the Connectivity, is for council, of course, to direct staff now to include a forecasted kind of estimated amount for broadband for 2021 and beyond. I will say that it has been a difficult figure for council to estimate at this point, because really the problem is so great in our community that council could spend millions of dollars to solve this. So really, is an investment of 50,000 sufficient to get us off the ground for the planning purposes? Or, you know, is council interested in investing millions at this point without kind of recommendations about what a program or Made in Elgin initiative might look like? So with council direction, we would be pleased to adjust the 2021 budget and beyond to accommodate council's wishes.
Mr. Warden.
Deputy Warden, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. We are already at a 3.3% increase, which is probably high compared to most of our neighbors. I know that we need that to maintain our services, but I don't think I'm prepared to put anything in the sock at the present time. Malahide has already applied for money from the provincial government on a study to look at enhancing broadband in our township. Certainly, and that is provincial money. I suggest that we look into that at a county level. I don't see anything happening in 2021, very likely in 2022. So at this time, I'm not prepared to bump our budget beyond that 3.3% for connectivity.
Mr. Warden, could I make a comment, please?
Absolutely.
I think we're all getting excited here for no reason, because number one, we got to get more information, and our our budget committee's working through this, and we're certainly going to look at all the information that we receive and certainly work through it to get it back to council. And I think we should just be very methodical about how we approach this budget. We shouldn't jump the gun on anything, and we need to look at all the information. So I think that we should be hearing back from the connectivity committee, get some information. We have other meetings coming up that we're going to be learning more information about our service delivery, et cetera. And let's just work through it. And we know that this is a concern because Councillor McPhail has brought it forward. We'll keep that in the back of our mind, and we'll certainly look at all those numbers, and we'll make that decision as a budget committee, and then of course bring it to council, and then that'll be the final say. So I think we're being a little premature of like yay, nay. So that's just my take on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jiguer.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. So I'd like to echo that. I think there is a way to convey to our community that this is a priority without having a line for it in the budget right now, because the range, as the CEO pointed out and Councillor French, the range of possibilities and different solutions we're contemplating range from totally policy oriented all the way to multi-million-dollar and actual physical investments and everything in between. So we're still exploring what model is best. And I think the only thing I could see is that it would be a symbolic gesture. And I don't think we need to do that, to echo Councillor French. I think we've made the commitment, and we need to come back to the connectivity committee needs to come back to council with different options that we've explored. And if I may, Mr. Warden, my second point, just to Jim, I wanted to clarify that, and I know today council is not considering an actual tax rate, but at the last budget committee meeting, the resolution was to bring a 3.2% rate, and I see that the presentation here mentions a 3.3. So I just wanted to reconcile that and let council, the rest of council know that the budget committee was considering more of a 3.2 increase at this stage.
Yeah, the difference was the public health was one of the items, but in the meeting this afternoon, we'll walk from the presentation on December 10th to the 3.3.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think Councillor Ketchabah, comment, please.
Thank you very much. I would definitely support and endorse the previous two speakers on their comments, and also draw council's attention to the fact that we still have some maneuvering to do, some exploration to do with the budget, whether it has to deal with the SDR, whether it has to deal with other potential things down the road. Just keep in mind, I want to draw council's attention to the fact that there is a potential unallocated reserve in the budget contemplated. Now, it's currently it's not earmarked, but it's to deal with unexpected contingencies that may deal or come up with COVID shortfalls. But I'm sure that there is something there should we need to do something with connectivity. But until we hear further advice from the connectivity committee on what the requirements are, I think it's a little premature to act. So I do agree with those earlier comments.
Thank you. And if I may add, SWIFT met on Friday, and I will note that the RFP for Elgin County closes this Friday, which, that's going to add more information, as Councillor French indicated. We are gathering information. I am excited with the passion of Councillor Jiguer and McPhail. One of the comments from the SWIFT meeting, because they're looking for funding, as everyone is, but the public are going to be very receptive. If we spend money to get everyone internet, there's not going to be a lot of complaining because they need it and the rewards are there. So I think we just keep going. Our budget committee and our connectivity committee we're going to come out with some good recommendations. So I'm looking forward to it. And I appreciate the passion there. So this latest lockdown has certainly brought it right back up to the forefront again. Any more questions or comments for Jim? Okay, again, a good discussion. Motion to receive and file?
No, there is a motion, be it resolved that approximately $9 million increase in total debt for the facility asset management plan be included in the preliminary budget, and that tax ratios for farm and small commercial be left unchanged.
All right, you've heard the motion. Do we have a mover and seconder?
So moved.
Deputy Warden, seconder, please. Counselor French? Ready for the question?
Deputy Warden Mennel,
Yes.
Counselor McPhail,
Yes.
Counselor Purcell,
Yes.
Counselor Martin,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
Yes.
Counselor French,
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer,
Yes.
Counselor Ketchba.
Yes.
Mr. Warden,
Yes,
9-0, the motion is carried.
thank you for that. Moving on, Director of Engineering Services, a contract award for cleaning services, something very, very important in these times. Go ahead, Brian, please.
Thank you, Mr. Warren, through to council. The current contract for cleaning services for the county's administration building, Heritage Center, and POA courthouse facilities is expiring, and a new tender was recently issued and closed on December 9th. 5 pre-qualified bidders were invited to submit a tender, which also included a request for bidders to provide separate pricing for enhanced day porter cleaning services for all common areas, washrooms, hallways, touch surfaces, etc. for the 3 facilities. Based on the 4 tender bid submissions, staff recommends that Serve You Clean Incorporated, being our current cleaning service provider, be awarded the cleaning service contract for a 2-year term at a price of $265,148 excluding HST, and also provide enhanced cleaning services for an initial 1-year term for an additional cost of $31,200 excluding HST. Recommendations are before you. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Brian. Questions for Brian? Fairly straightforward. Mover and a seconder, please.
Sally will move.
Thank you. Counselor Martin and Jones, call the question, please.
Deputy Warden Mennel,
Yes.
Counselor McPhail. Counselor McPhail.
Yes.
Thank you. Counselor Purcell.
Yes.
Counselor Martin.
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
Counselor French.
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer.
Yes.
Counselor Ketchba.
Yes.
Mr. Warden,
Yes,
9-0, the motion is carried.
thank you for that. Brian, you're still up. John Wise Line Reconstruction Project. I can almost look out the window and see it.
Thank you, Mr. Warren, through to council once again. Staff are pleased with the competitive tender results before you and recommend award of the project to the successful contractor, being ASG Excavating Incorporated, in the amount of $1,211,058.65 excluding HST. Jim previously spoke to the savings that are available with respect to what was budgeted and the realization now of savings that can be identified in the budget. Work on this project is anticipated to commence on May 3rd, and substantial completion anticipated to be achieved by June 30th. With that, be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Brian. Questions for Brian? Noting it was a good result on the tender. All right, receive and file, or?
This one, be it resolved that ASG Excavating be awarded the John Wise Line Reconstruction Project tender number 2020 T40 at a total price of $1,211,858.65 exclusive of HST, and that project funds in the amount of $1,215,000 be pre-approved for inclusion in the 2021 capital budget to fund the expected project construction cost, and that the warden and CAO be directed to authorize and sign the contract.
All right. Looks like I have a mover in Ketchba. Seconder, please.
I'll second.
Jiguer. Call the question, please.
Deputy Warden Mennel.
Yes.
Counselor McPhail.
Yes.
Counselor Purcell.
Yes.
Counselor Martin.
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
Counselor French.
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer.
Yes.
Counselor Ketchba.
Yes.
Mr. Warden,
Yes,
9-0, the motion is carried.
thank you for that. Village of Rodney reconstruction tender. Brian, you're still up.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Warden. Through the County Council, this project is being undertaken in partnership with the municipality of West Elgin. Staff are once again pleased with the tender results and recommend award of the project to the successful contractor, being Van Bree Drainage and Bulldozing Limited, in the amount of $4,741,050.11, excluding HST, and subject to the municipality of West Elgin's commitment to fund its proportionate share. A decrease of the county's project-specific 2021 capital budget can be realized. Work on this project is anticipated to commence in April 2021 and be substantially completed by the end of the year. With that, the recommendations are before you. Be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Brian?
Mr. Warden, it's Bob Purcell.
Go ahead.
Unless council is willing to transfer these funds to Dunwich, I'd be happy to move this project. Go ahead.
It is nice to see competitive bids. So moved by Purcell, second by
I'll second that.
McPhail. I bet you would. Ready for the question?
Deputy Warden Mennel,
Yes.
Councillor McPhail,
Yes.
Councillor Purcell,
Yes.
Councillor Martin, Councillor Jones,
Yes.
Councillor French,
Yes.
Councillor Jiguer,
Yes.
Councillor Ketchba,
Yes.
Mr. Warden,
Yes.
9-0, the motion is carried.
Thank you. We're on to our solicitor. Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. The report before you relates to a short-term bicycle rental pilot project operating in Port Stanley. A 2-year commitment was made in 2019. Under the previous agreement, the fees were prepaid to the Drop Bike Inc. The project proceeded in 2019, but did not proceed in 2020 due to pandemic restrictions. It was proposed that the project be reinstated in 2021. Given the realities of the suspension, I found it necessary to create a replacement agreement, particularly given that the treasurer required that the prepaid fees for the second year be repaid and be available for subsequent payment back to Drop Bike by the end of March of this year. So the proposal is simply to reinstate what has been a suspended agreement. The terms and conditions are the same. There is a 60-day termination clause that should be kept in mind that would be in effect to the end of this year. There's no new financial input being required. Drop Bike did repay the prepaid fees by the end of the years as had been demanded. It's my understanding that Central Elgin has approved execution of the agreement, and Drop Bike has also approved the terms of the replacement agreement. So the recommendation is that council approve the replacement services agreement and that the warden and chief administrative officer be authorized to execute that replacement agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Questions, comments?
Sally would like to speak.
Go ahead.
Just the only comment I would make is I have, who knows what COVID's going to be like come this season. And I hate to have them judged if they're only, if they're not able to function till September or such. So I don't know, is there a possibility that it could be put off another year if this one does not open up with the COVID restrictions?
I would say under a further extension or amendment or revision, it probably could be. Certainly, we are now in possession of the funds for that second year.
Further comments? What is your will and pleasure?
I would so move the recommend.
Moved by Martin, second by Mennel. Please call the vote.
Deputy Warden Mennel.
Yes.
Councillor McPhail.
Yes.
Councillor Purcell.
Yes.
Councillor Martin.
Yes.
Councillor Jones.
Yes.
Councillor French.
Yes.
Councillor Jiguer.
Yes.
Councillor Ketchba.
Yes.
Mr. Warden,
Yes,
9-0, the motion is carried.
thank you. County policy revisions.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Through you to members of council. The report included in your agenda package details some suggested revisions for both the warden's policy and council's policy. This is based on council's direction to include a draft that compensates councillors for virtual meeting attendance to offset costs associated with the use of personal internet. As well, we have included some additional amendments that have arisen over the past couple of years, and those are based on council feedback. So we'd be happy to take direction from here. The recommendation is that we, following discussion today, we would bring back a final copy of both of those policies for council's approval at a future meeting. Be happy to answer any questions.
Open the floor for questions. Councillor Martin,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I'm very pleased to see the one on meals because certainly the conferences we've attended. So it doesn't make sense to do the $75 a day. I'm glad to see that's changed. And I would also agree when you mentioned that we haven't been using the credit card, the corporate credit card by the warden. I think we probably should get rid of it. I know St. Thomas ran into some major problems with that and eventually got rid of it. So if it's not being used, I think it's probably a good thing to just discontinue its use.
I'd comment that the former 4 wards didn't use it. The 5th one won't either, so rest assured. Further comments? I have a comment on the $5 per hour. And I think that's, I guess, if I justify if I'm paid to drive in here, say it's a $20 bill, and if I stay home and use 3 hours, it sort of works out. It'll be a bit of work to keep track of it. I would ask the question, like, because I imagine someone will ask me the $5 per hour. How is that justified? Like, why wasn't it $4 or $6 or $7.10? And are we going to, if our meeting lasts for 3.5 hours, are we going to sort of prorate it? Those type of things for ease of keeping track. If it's more like if it's 40 minutes, do we round it up? Those kind of questions. I'd just like some answers so we're all on the same page. Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Warden, the $5 came out of discussion from members of County Council at the meeting when this was discussed. And I believe, without putting you on the spot, Councillor Jiguer, this was based on some research that you had completed. So can we pass it over to you to speak to this one?
Certainly, there's no, I would say that the same way you can't predict the cost of fuel and yet we set sort of a mileage rate and everyone's consumption based on the car you drive is also different and we agree on a flat rate. So the $5 was based on several different contracts that often result into $5 per gig. And the correlation to an hour is that on average, a Zoom meeting will consume 1 gig per hour. So hence the $5 per hour. So that's roughly, and I know many people will say, I pay more than $5 per gig. Others will say, there's no way I'm paying $5 per gig. But I would say that would be the same with the car you drive. So that's kind of a middle of the line rate that I believe is also cheaper than compensating counselors for traveling by car.
It seems logical to me, but I just want to bring it out. Some of us, like I think my internet is $127 a month. And whether you're driving a Buick or a motorized scooter, I guess. Further comments? Are we ready to accept this report? I'm looking for a mover and a seconder.
I'll move. This is Jones.
I'll
Jones,
second.
Jones and Martin. Call the question, please.
Deputy Warden Mennel.
Yes.
Councillor McPhail.
Yes.
Councillor Purcell.
Yes.
Councillor Martin.
Yes.
Councillor Jones.
Yes.
Councillor French.
Yes.
Councillor Jiguer.
Yes.
Councillor Ketchba.
Yes.
Mr. Warden.
Yes.
9-0, the motion is carried.
Thank you. We're on to COVID emergency team planning. Who's taking that? Go ahead, Julie.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Through you to members of council, on a monthly basis, we provide you with an updated chart that reflects the operational activities put in place to support our response to COVID-19. The information included is pretty self-explanatory, but any members of my team would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Anyone have any questions?
Julie, are we getting any vaccinations for our staff yet?
Yes, thanks. Great question. Through you, Mr. Warden, to Deputy Warden Mennel. At this point, we've had just about 30% of our long-term care home staff volunteer to receive the vaccination, and those staff members have received the first dose of the Pfizer vaccine at the Agriplex in London. We do anticipate that additional staff will continue to volunteer, and we, in terms of capacity, we are able to put forward kind of 15% of our staffing complement who work in long-term care home forward for that list of vaccinations. That said, we also expect in the coming weeks or sooner, even in the coming days, that once Southwestern Public Health secures vaccinations for our long-term care home residents, that process will be put in place as soon as we can accommodate them. So we're excited to be partners with Southwestern Public Health in this process, and excited that so many of our staff have stepped up to be among the first to receive the vaccine and protect themselves, our residents, and the community as a whole.
Okay, thanks, Julie. That's good news.
It certainly is. It's a ray of hope for sure we're all looking for. No further questions? Mover and seconder for that report?
So moved.
Mennel and Purcell? I'll call the question, please.
Deputy Warden Mennel.
Yes.
Councillor McPhail.
Yes.
Councillor Purcell.
Yes.
Councillor Martin.
Yes.
Councillor Jones.
Yes.
Councillor French.
Yes.
Councillor Jiguer.
Yes.
Councillor Ketchba.
Yes.
Mr. Warden.
Yes.
9-0, the motion is carried.
Thank you for that. I think we're at correspondence. First item for consideration is a letter from Debbie France. Do we need to take action on that, or is it?
That's at the discretion of council.
Any comments on that letter? You need action or just receive and file?
Receive and file, in my opinion.
All right, are you moving that?
Yes.
Thank you. Seconder? Sorry, Jones? Okay.
Deputy Warden Mennel.
Yes.
Councillor McPhail.
Yes.
Councillor Purcell.
Yes.
Councillor Martin. Councillor Jones.
Yes.
Councillor French.
Yes.
Councillor Jiguer.
Yes.
Councillor Ketchba.
Yes.
Mr. Warden.
Yes.
9-0, the motion is carried.
Thank you. The second letter is from municipality of Dunwich. Bob, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, I can speak to it very briefly. This is a result of it being brought to our attention in the West End that we have the same homeless situation that we have all across the county. Except we have a group of active people down here trying to do something about it and have turned to both of our councils, West Elgin and Dutton Dunwich. So we just sent it in for information as much as anything. However, there's one comment I do want to make. Our social services did receive a chunk of money from the province based on a per capita basis through St. Thomas, and they administer all this type of thing for us. But this might be one of those situations where, unless we ask, none of those funds would go directly out to the municipalities in Elgin County. That would just stay in the coffers of social services. I know that even a small amount of money locally gets applied very directly and used in a very personal way to provide some help when necessary. And there really isn't a lot of funding or avenues that these folks can turn to try to house a few of these people locally or do something. Church groups try to step up. Some of the local service clubs try to step up, but they might need something as simple as a rental overnight for a few months or a couple months of an apartment or something. So I just wonder, maybe we can just ask if there's any thought of allocating on a per capita basis some of this extra money that's been sent out to deal with this type of issue by the province.
Well, certainly it's a real problem, especially in this cold weather, and it's happening more and more. But Julie, would you like to comment?
Certainly. Thanks, Mr. Warden. Through you to members of council. I think the concerns and comments raised by Councillor Purcell are not necessarily unique and do resonate with many other members of council. As such, I have contacted Heather Sheridan, who is the Director of Social Services for the City of St. Thomas, and council can expect to receive a delegation from Heather either on January 26th or at your first meeting in February. And what I've asked from Heather is that she provide us with a list of where which county services have been recipients of the additional provincial dollars, which are referred to as SSRF funding or sometimes CHIPPY funding. So we'll make sure that Heather's presentation provides as much information as possible and that councillors have the opportunity to ask these very important questions about whether city delivered social services is meeting the needs of Elgin County residents and some of the demands placed on our communities as a result of COVID or not. So council can look forward to that.
Thank you, Julie.
Mr. Warden, could I comment on the letter?
You certainly may.
Aylmer has the same problem, Councillor Purcell. We've had some crisis situations over the Christmas holidays, and I have the same questions you do and concerns, and I've talked closely with the warden and the CAO about this. I'm really looking forward to the report from Heather Sheridan, and I think that it's getting more and more prevalent in Elgin County that we do have a homelessness issue, and we're going to have to address this, and I think we may have to do even more than what we think we're going to have to do. We can only leave it up to church members and volunteers so far, and then we're going to have to step in. And I'll tell you, it was, I don't even know how to explain how I felt when I had people calling me over the Christmas holidays and they were desperate. So it puts you in a very serious position, and especially during a holiday time, staff were away or whatever. And I felt like my hands were tied, and bless the warden and CAO for helping me through this and helping our community. And Heather Sheridan was excellent. She did call me and we had a great conversation, and we have kind of got things under control a little bit here, but it looks like we're going to be okay for a while. But I'm telling you, it's getting to the point that as a county council, we're really going to have to start looking at these issues differently. Thanks, Mr. Warden.
All right, Julie, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. I think another thing that's important to keep in mind is that council is working closely with the City of St. Thomas and the Town of Aylmer on the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. The advisory committee is meeting, I believe it's tomorrow, to go through a whole lot of information that we've received through a number of consultation sessions and facilitated sessions with Jennifer Kirkham. And I think it won't be a surprise to anyone that homelessness will be among the highest ranked priorities identified by our community for inclusion in this community safety and well-being plan. Part of this planning process will be to come up with recommended community actions to support the issues that are identified through this planning process. So I think it's important that council continue to track closely how the community safety and well-being plan is progressing, and we'd be happy to bring a report forward at your next meeting, just to bring you up to speed about how we're making out there and what the community is identifying kind of at a high level at this point of community need.
You certainly have to bless the volunteers. The demands on our food banks, et cetera, they're going up. I have reached out to the United Way. Joe Press and I are former board members, and I've got an email early this morning. I've got a call back, and they're willing to assist us and take a look at some of these things. So we are getting tremendous cooperation from them. And as Mayor French has said, certainly the city has stepped up, and we're in a community where a lot of people care and do step up. We got to be thankful for that. Do we need a report, or is that just?
It's a receive and file.
Okay.
Mr. Warden, it's Sally.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I really think that the West Elgin, especially like Elmer and Central Elgin and Malahide and stuff, we're close enough together that people say in Central Elgin can make access to some of the help of the social services. But I think the ones like certainly West Elgin and Dunwich Dutton do need help. And I think that's very important that we support a group like this. And so I hope when Heather comes that we can learn that. I just hate having to put it off until February, because this is the time when it's needed.
So noted, yes. Mover and a seconder, please.
Mr. Warden?
Yes.
Within the context of the discussion, I move that we simply file this correspondence.
Thank you. Seconder? Catch a ball? Call a vote, please.
Deputy Warden Mennel.
Yes.
Councillor McPhail.
Yes.
Councillor Purcell.
Yes.
Councillor Martin. Councillor Jones.
Yes.
Councillor French.
Yes.
Councillor Jiguer.
Yes.
Councillor Ketchba.
Yes.
Mr. Warden.
Yes.
9-0, the motion is carried.
Thank you. Move on to items for information of correspondence. We have 10 items. Anyone like to comment on one or the other, or just receive what's your pleasure?
I'll move we receive and file.
Thank you for that. Deputy Warden, seconder, please.
Martin will second.
Thank you. Call the vote, please.
Deputy Warden Mennel.
Yes.
Councillor McPhail. Councillor Purcell. Councillor Martin. Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Yes.
Councillor French.
Yes.
Councillor Jiguer.
Yes.
Councillor Ketchba.
Yes.
Mr. Warden.
Yes.
9-0, the motion is carried.
Now I think we're at other business. Okay, statements, inquiries by members, please. Seeing none, I have one concerning Alzheimer's. The County of Elgin will be flying the Alzheimer's Society flag at the Elgin Heritage Center for the month of January to mark Alzheimer's Awareness Month. The County of Elgin is proud to play a role in bringing awareness to this disease that affects so many people within our community. Everyone knows someone who has been diagnosed with dementia, and we are familiar with the challenges faced by both those diagnosed with the disease and their loved ones. Each year in Canada, 25,000 people are diagnosed with a form of dementia, and numbers are expected to rise. By 2031, there will be almost 1 million Canadians living with a form of dementia. Awareness is the first step in understanding what people living with dementia experience in their day-to-day lives so that we can fight the stigmas associated with this disease and ensure that those we love are receiving care and services tailored to their unique needs. We all have a role to play in making our community safe and inclusive for people living with dementia. I wish you were all here, we'll raise the flag later, but obviously you won't, so it'd be being cold out there, but I know you'd be here with her in spirit, but certainly proud to do that. Is there any further comments or statements? Seeing none. Are we at closed meeting agenda?
There is a matter of urgency.
Okay, go ahead.
So the purpose of this verbal report is to advise council that our face covering bylaw has expired. OREG 36420 is still in effect. So really the party in control of public space remains obliged to ensure that entrants wear face coverings, and that's subject to prosecution if he or she fails to do so. Council will recall that the primary foundation for enactment of the face covering bylaw was direction issued by the medical officer of health through a letter of instruction. And that letter of instruction required various mandatory health measures, including face covering, and recommended enactment of a municipal bylaw. So council enacted a bylaw on August 6th and some amendments to that bylaw on August 12th. And it expired on December 31st. The town of Elmer and municipality of Denton Dunwich enacted separate bylaws and are excluded from the county's bylaw. But we do think it is prudent to determine the position of both the town of Elmer and municipality of Denton Dunwich in respect to face covering requirements before finalizing Elgin's position. Additionally, we are recommending to council that we seek direction and input from the medical officer of health before reenactment of the bylaw, specifically whether she recommends reenactment, as we wouldn't want to reenact a bylaw that's contrary to the position of or without express consent from the medical officer of health. So we're seeking council's direction to proceed in this fashion, which would include consulting with 2 of our municipal partners and the medical officer of health. And then we'll bring back some recommendations and possibly a face covering bylaw for council's renewal or enactment at a future meeting.
Thank you. Seconder for that report, please. Jones. Call the vote, please.
Deputy Warden Mennel.
Yes.
Councillor Purcell.
Yes.
Councillor McPhail.
Yes.
Councillor Martin.
Yes.
Councillor Jones.
Yes.
Councillor French.
Yes.
Councillor Giguère.
Yes.
Councillor Ketchipa.
Yes.
Mr. Warden.
Yes,
9-0, the motion is carried.
thank you. Now we need are we going to have a short break before we go into closed session, or what's your will and pleasure? Do you want to soldier on, or do you want a short break?
I'm good.
Okay, I'm getting thumbs up, so need a motion to go into closed session, please.
Could I ask a question first?
Certainly.
As I have declared a conflict on item number 2, I assume I will have to disconnect at that point. Is it possible to do items 1, 3, and 4, and then I can disconnect and stay out?
Yeah.
Certainly, another option is we could put you in a waiting room. So we do it electronically, and so you're still technically in the meeting. We just bring you back when that matter has been discussed.
All right, whichever, fine. I just wasn't certain how to proceed.
Thank you. Do we have a mover and seconder to go into closed session? French. Call the vote, please.
Deputy Warden Mennel.
Yes.
Councillor McPhail. Thank you. Counselor Purcell.
Yes.
Counselor Martin.
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
Counselor French.
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer.
Yes.
Counselor Ketchba.
Yes.
Mr. Warden.
Yes.
9-0, the motion is carried.
Okay. And open session, says recess, but I think we're going to skip that. Motion to rise and report.
So we're doing each closed session item?
Yeah.
Okay. In-camera item number 1 for the QP bargaining mandate, be it resolved that staff proceed as directed.
Mover and seconder, please. Jones. Purcell, call the vote.
Yes.
Deputy Warden Mennel.
Yes.
Counselor Purcell.
Yes.
Counselor McPhail.
Yes.
Counselor Martin.
Yes.
Counselor Jones. Counselor French.
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer.
Yes.
Counselor Ketchba.
Yes.
Mr. Warden.
Yes.
9-0, the motion is carried. For closed session item number 2, White Station Operations Center Building Condition Assessment Findings, be it resolved that the report from the Director of Engineering Services be received for information and that staff proceed as directed.
Mover and seconder.
So moved.
Mennel, Jones, call the vote, please.
Deputy Warden Mennel.
Yes.
Counselor McPhail.
Yes.
Counselor Purcell.
Yes.
Counselor Martin.
No.
Yes.
What's that?
Declared conflict.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Counselor Martin declared conflict. Counselor Jones.
Yes.
Counselor French.
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer.
Yes.
Counselor Ketchba.
Yes.
And Mr. Warden.
Yes.
8-1, motion is carried. Closed session item number 3, which is the Fillmore Bridge discussion. Be it resolved that the report from the Director of Engineering Services and County Solicitor be received and that staff proceed as directed.
Mover, seconder. Jiguer. Ketchba, call the vote.
Deputy Warden Mennel.
Yes.
Counselor McPhail.
Yes.
Counselor Purcell.
Yes.
Counselor Martin.
Yes.
Counselor Jones. Counselor French.
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer.
Yes.
Counselor Ketchba.
Yes.
Mr. Warden.
Yes.
9-0, the motion is carried. Closed session item number 4, the Port Bruce Temporary Bridge and Boat Launch. Be it resolved that the correspondence from Mr. Campbell and Baruti Law on behalf of North Erie Marina be received and that staff proceed as directed.
Mover and seconder, please.
So moved.
Deputy Mayor, Deputy Warden Mennel, and Jones.
Deputy Warden Mennel.
Yes.
Counselor McPhail.
Yes.
Counselor Purcell.
Yes.
Counselor Martin.
Yes.
Counselor Jones. Counselor French.
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer.
Yes.
Counselor Ketchba.
Yes.
Mr. Warden.
Yes.
9-0, the motion is carried.
Motion to adopt recommendations from Committee of the Whole.
Sally will move.
Okay, Martin. French, call vote.
Deputy Warden Mennel.
Yes.
Counselor McPhail.
Yes.
Counselor Purcell.
Yes.
Counselor Martin. Counselor Jones.
Yes.
Counselor French.
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer.
Yes.
Counselor Ketchba.
Yes.
Mr. Warden.
Yes.
9-0, the motion is carried.
Bylaws.
Bylaw, be it a first, second, and third read of bylaw 21-01, being a bylaw to confirm proceedings of the Municipal Council of the Corporation of the County of Elgin at the January 12th, 2021 meeting.
Mover and seconder, Ketchba, Purcell.
Deputy Warden Mennel.
Yes.
Counselor McPhail.
Yes.
Counselor Purcell.
Yes.
Counselor Martin. I think that's a yes. Oh, thank you. We heard squeaking. Counselor French.
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer.
Yes.
Counselor Ketchba.
Yes.
Mr. Warden.
Yes.
9-0, the motion is carried.
Okay.
Adjournment.
Mover for adjournment, please.
Purcell.
Seconder Jones, call the vote, please.
Deputy Warden Mennel.
Yes.
Counselor McPhail.
Yes.
Counselor Purcell.
Yes.
Counselor Martin,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
Yes.
Counselor French,
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer,
Yes.
Counselor Ketchba,
Yes.
and Mr. Warden.
Yes.
9-0, the motion is carried.
Thank you, everyone. No, we are going into budget meeting. I wish you were here. They just brought lunch and it's quite a spread, so
Yeah.
thank you for your patience. We did a lot of work today. Good discussion.